In its efforts to destroy ISIS, the American-led coalition has conducted nearly 28,000 drone strikes in Iraq and Syria.
But those strikes have killed and continue to kill many civilians. There have been reportedly 466 civilian casualties in Iraq alone since 2014. But a new report in the New York Times shows that number is vastly underestimated. One of the report's authors, investigative reporter Azmat Khan, is here to discuss her findings. Good to see you.
Great to see you guys.
Azmat, your research was fascinating, and I know it took you several months on the ground. I actually met you last year when you were just going through some of that research. According to it, 1 in 5 coalition strikes in Iraq resulted in civilian deaths. That is 31 times more than according to the coalition. So why this discrepancy?
Well, a lot of this came down to questions about how the coalition prioritizes its investigations, what it knows about what is truly happening on the ground, and specifically, they don't have people on the ground investigating these civilian casualties. Even when you give them, for example, witnesses or survivors, I've talked to advocates who've said that when they do investigations, they're not necessarily interviewing these witnesses or survivors. And I saw that firsthand with a main character in our story, a man who speaks fluent English, who lived in the United States for many years, and whose family was killed in an airstrike in September of 2015 in this anti-ISIS air war. And he tried repeatedly to get his case investigated. He went to the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. He had a cousin who was a professor at Yale University. And this is someone who was never interviewed by a member of the military or contacted by a member of the military until we raised his case. And so if someone like that has had so many problems in doing so, then what chance does an ordinary Iraqi who doesn't speak English?
If you're executing drone strikes, you're incentivized to not think you're killing civilians, right? Personally, on a policy basis, does your reporting show that there's an active effort to undercount it, that it's a sin of omission? Why is this happening?
So they're not just drone strikes. They're all different kinds of airstrikes. And there'll be aircraft that include B-52 bombers and some of the best, most precision weaponry arsenal and munitions that the United States has in its arsenal. But in terms of why this is happening, I've come to different understandings, and there are different arguments that have been made in these cases. Some say that emphasis on winning hearts and minds that was at the heart of counterinsurgency doctrine in 08-09 and particular commanders like Petraeus and Crystal, that there's no one like that anymore. Another argument that also holds some credibility is this idea that if they do investigate these civilian casualties as they're happening in real time, it could slow down the air campaign. It could raise questions. And so much of this air campaign has been about swiftly retaking things. But at the end of the day, what you can trace with certainty is the fact that there are problems in the way that the military is able to, or the U.S.-led coalition is able to even identify its own airstrikes. And that makes it very difficult, for example, when someone brings an allegation to them of a civilian casualty, for them to even be able to figure out what went wrong and why.
Well, when you say identify, they don't even know which airstrikes were theirs?
So we turned over 103 coordinates from these different airstrikes. I went to the site of every single one on the ground. My reporting partner I worked with, Anand Gopal, he was also looking at these airstrikes. We turned over 103 of these coordinates. In fact, even more than that. And we asked officials at the U.S. Air Base in Qatar to check their logs to see if these were coalition airstrikes. And in multiple cases in which they said, look, this wasn't us, the nearest airstrike was as far as 600 meters away, we were able to locate the coalition's own videos showing that they carried out airstrikes in those places. And the responses we got when we asked them about those discrepancies was, look, I can only tell you what's in the log.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you would think you are 2 journalists on the ground doing this research that if they wanted to, or if they believed that they needed to do better research, they could send 2 of their officers out and do some of the same kind of investigations. What kind of response have you heard from the governments or the communities of Syria or Iraq to your reporting?
So the governments of Iraq and Syria have not responded in that kind of way. I did speak to many local officials in all of the places that I was going to, and it was really fascinating to me the ways in which I was able to confirm a lot of these civilian casualty allegations with local officials who knew this had happened. It was no secret. They were aware of it. The tricky part is figuring out who carried out the airstrike. So in a country like Iraq, You have the Iraqi Air Force that's bombing, and you also have the U.S.-led coalition that's bombing. And so there are questions about who was responsible for an individual strike, and most of the Iraqis who are on the receiving end of those strikes, who are civilians, they have no way of often distinguishing between them.
Okay. Azmat Khan on an important and hard-to-report story. Thanks so much for sharing the details.
Thank you guys for having me.